on the internet just for fun and to improve my own chess. So in this game, this is how the game ended, and I'm down to a lowly 1312 as rating points on ICC. My handle is J-O'Donnell. Okay, so let's go back to the first of the game and see what happened. I've got the analysis machine on here, and all the green lines you see, that's what the computer is telling me I should do. So I followed its advice and advance my pawn. This is just a very basic, all games start like this, basically. Well, all safe games anyway. The computer here says to advance his pawn. There's lots of options. You can advance your pawn too, or you could go out here, or you could play out to here. This is one I like to play a lot, because the idea is if I take here, then he takes back and get a double pawn. And otherwise he can defend by knight up, but it's not that fun. Let's just see what happened in the game. So I advanced my knight, hoping to continue this variation and protect this pawn. This is kind of a trap that happens sometimes, and it's that if I were to go here, so let's just go new variation, and let's say he were to just play normally, but not to there, because the queen is the key part here. So let's say he were to play up like this, which a lot of people do. Then I were to take, forcing him to have a double pawn. I mean, that's good for me, but it really opens him up a lot. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of it. Let's go back to the first and get off that train of thought, since I can't reproduce it. So here it says, an interesting move that I never ever play. And this is something that comes up quite common because people are trying to defend the pawn. Also, they're trying to bring the bishop out so they can castle. Here it says just to take straight away, and at first glance, it looks like that is a problem, but let's see what happens. So I didn't do this in the game, but if he takes back, the pawn is ready to fork both pieces. And once that happens, the bishop backs up, the pawn takes, the bishop takes, and the computer here says that I'm up a half a pawn. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but it's pretty good. I don't really consider that option very much. The other thing is it makes your queen quite active to protect this knight and to protect your pawn. So you get quite active with your queen, and the lines continue, but anyway, it's pretty interesting. So instead, I advance my pawn, he advances bishop. I did not take the pawn, but instead I went for this knight capture. He decided to advance his knight, and here I could have just taken the pawn, but I didn't do it, and I was just a misplay. I should have taken it. But anyway, he took that, took back with pawn, and now there's a couple interesting things, and this is what I really like about this game. The queen can really make a lot of advancements, mostly because this pawn is undefended, and this pawn is weakly defended once this bishop comes down to c4. That's not what I did, but that is an actual big attack here. It's so big that if queen goes up, and let's say he were to capture here, then I can take back his bishop. It's a fair exchange. And he advances the pawn, and I move to here. All of a sudden, once this is moved and this is moved back to here, there's quite a large threat here. On this pawn. So maybe it doesn't do a whole lot right now, but that was sort of one of the ideas that I had in this game. So let's see what happened. He took back. I move my knight back, which probably wasn't the greatest move because it blocks in my queen. So he brings his queen down with the idea that he could advance his pawn and threaten to hit me here with the queen in checkmate. So I said I could either advance the pawn to block, or, which I just like to do anyway, is castle. So I just castled here. That was fine. He brought the queen over and put it in line with the king. This is always a really dangerous idea, and this is what the computer says to do, because then once the knight ends up protecting or whatever, but let's say he did another move like this, then as soon as the knight moves away, the queen is pinned to the king and can eventually take right here. So let's just go back. So in the game, he took. I advanced to kick him out of there and prevent this pawn from advancing one. A lot of times this is really powerful, but in this time it's in reverse, so the bishop is behind, which doesn't have protection. So he decides to move away. I decide to bring the rook here to threaten the king, and once the knight moves up to Once the knight moves up to e4, it can just kill the queen because the king will be in check. So I didn't do that in the game, though. Pops over, hit the queen, and the queen moves away. And this is really interesting, too. So basically here, we're even in material, and we're even... Well, he's up a pawn, but the computer says we're even. So he decides to move here, and this is where I made a big mistake. I'll see if you can catch it, but the knight should move to d5. The reason being is that if the knight moves here, and let's say that, first of all, the knight cannot come to attack because he's pinned to the king, because he hasn't had a chance to castle yet. So let's say he were to take here, then the knight can simply go and check the king and win the queen. So that's a huge thing for sure. I didn't see this at the time, and instead I backed my bishop off to lose that advantage. So that's something I should have caught on to, taking advantage of the pin that I'd already created to the king, knowing that this square was a lot more safe than I initially thought it was. But these are only 15-minute games, so it sort of goes fast. He castles. I was recommended to take here. It doesn't give me much advantage material-wise, and I don't know, I just wasn't a big fan of it. So I moved the queen out to do a little more of a threat, hoping to move my queen over to line it up with the king and maybe make this bishop advancement to h6. He decides to move his queen in front, offering an exchange of queens. And I have a great move right now, which I thought was good, to move the knight up. The idea is that now there's two attackers on this knight, so the knight is forced to take. So he takes, and I'm able to threaten his queen with my bishop, meanwhile double threatening this pawn in behind. He decides to move away, and I've got a few things I can do here. One is to move the rook up, but I don't really want to do that. I want to take the pawn immediately. He captures back, I capture back, and now this is a huge advantage for me because this solitary pawn is weakly defended by this bishop. So anything will be able to kill it. He moves there. Now, I could have done a lot of things to make this better. The first move is to move, I think, the bishop to f4. So if I had moved the bishop here, it would have been able to attack the c7 pawn twice, and his bishop would have had to react, and then I could have captured the pawn. Instead, I made a poor move, which was to go here. Ideally, it's protected by there, so I can force the bishop to move, trying to capture this pawn. He could have moved his rook, but he did not. He decided to protect it. So I immediately took that pawn. Now, he could have taken back pawn, but instead he was more aggressive and decided to go for the queen. And this is the reason I want to show this game. It's because the economy of moves is so important. He's trying for an aggressive checkmate on the right-hand side of the board in this area, and it only takes one move for me to prevent it. So I make one move here, and he had to play 1-2 moves to do it. And that actually makes a big difference. So he moved his rook over, I exchanged, he exchanged, and now I've got this queen here and this pawn, and I've got one pass pawn that I'm going to use to win the game. So I decided to take here immediately, and he decided to bring his queen down. I have to move up for check, and here he could have taken my pawn, but he tries something even trickier, even more aggressive. And really, black should be on the defensive right now. He's down by 2 pawns, and my position is much stronger than his. So he decides to move here and threaten to take my rook. This is bad because it exposes his back pawn, and now if he were to take my rook, let's say, like this, it would be immediate checkmate because I could just capture his rook and then checkmate on the king. So he decides to move over to prevent that, and now it offers me a really crazy move, I think, to move the pawn up. But it actually ends up either promoting or checkmate. The reason is this pawn is blocking this bishop's movement to here. It's a really good move, and actually, if I move to here immediately, let's just see what happens. He can capture the rook. I can advance the pawn. He can protect there. That's the problem. Right. So what I need to do is get rid of that pawn. So I go back. Let's just go back to where the game was. Instead, I decided of moving my pawn ahead to move my bishop up. The idea is threatening his bishop and also threatening his queen. He takes back his material while he can, and I capture his bishop because that was my main problem. Now I can check the king. Yes, move back. And I decide to move up to defend all my pieces. My rook is defended, my pawns are defended, and I have this passed pawn to just wait till the end, until he gets far enough. He checks me, I move back to the back rank because my rook is protecting this back rank. Advancing my pawns, his queen has nothing to do because there's no way she can really check, there's nothing she can do, so she's just dancing around, waiting for me to advance my pieces. Here, I wanted to threaten his rook, so his rook had to move away. And he decided to advance his pawn. So I made this move ahead, which was the right move. He backed off his king, and then I missed out on this awesome move for checkmate. To go here, he captures, I take back, checkmate. Instead, I played the foolish move of going up. He decided I'm just going to wait and see if this guy's dumb enough to let me capture his rook, which I was. He captures, and it's a check. I was thinking at this point, if he captures, I'll just capture back and it'll be checkmate. But that wasn't the case. So he captures, moves up, and he should have taken the pawn there, but he didn't. I still can't advance my pawn, but I take his, threatening his rook, and killing him on the back rank. He moves ahead. I check him again, and he moves away. And now my pawns are free to walk to the end. And there it is. That's the game. So there's a lot of things to think about here. It's just sort of a way for me to share my thoughts, but the main idea of this game is to not be careless at the end. That's one thing for sure. And take advantage of the situations you try to create. Like that pin that was back here. That was a big mistake for me because I counted on his knight not being able to advance, but really I could have done a lot more. So this was the position, I guess. And that would have won me the game a lot quicker. So hopefully this taught you something and is able to help you advance from 13-15 to something of more prominence. Thanks so much for watching.